In the biting cold of early morning, Ranger Eliza Monroe stood on the creaking wooden steps of her outpost cabin, a steel mug of coffee steaming in her gloved hands. All around her, the dense forest of Black Pine National Park slumbered under a heavy blanket of snow. Frost glazed the treetops like powdered sugar. Her boots crunched softly as she shifted her weight, the silence around her broken only by the occasional groan of wind winding through bare branches. Another quiet day, she thought. Then the stillness shattered. The underbrush about 40 yards from her cabin trembled. Birds burst skyward, squawking. Eliza narrowed her eyes, instinctively reaching for the tranquilizer rifle leaning against the porch rail. Something was coming through the woods. Something big. What emerged next froze her hand mid-reach. A bear, massive, matted, limping, and yet impossibly calm. Its fur, once a healthy brown, was caked with frost and mud. Ribs showed faintly beneath its thick coat. One front paw dragged with a slight hitch, leaving a broken trail in the snow. But what caught her off guard wasn't its size or its injury. It was its eyes. They were fixed on her. Not with threat, not with hunger, but with something softer, something pleading. Eliza didn't move. For 10 long seconds, woman and bear stared at one another across the expanse of snow. Then the animal took a single step forward. Slow, deliberate, no aggression in its posture. As a seasoned forest ranger, Eliza had faced her share of wildlife encounters. She'd darted angry moose, radio-tagged mountain lions, and once stared down a wolf that got too curious for its own good. But this was different. The bear wasn't acting like a wild animal. It wasn't bluff-charging, it wasn't foraging aggressively. It was waiting. Her training kicked in. Eliza's job came with a strict mandate: never feed wild animals. It taught them to associate humans with food, which led to dangerous confrontations and often tragic ends. She'd enforced that rule herself more times than she could count. But something about this bear gave her pause. It didn't come closer. Instead, it sat. Right there, at the edge of the trees, the bear folded its legs beneath it like a tired dog and simply waited, watching. Eliza's heart pounded. Every fiber of her being screamed that this was unusual behavior. Bears didn't behave like this unless they were desperate or dying. She glanced toward the food locker by her cabin. Inside was a sealed container of smoked salmon from her rations. She hesitated. Rules were clear, but so was the look in that bear's eyes. Still not believing what she was doing, Eliza moved slowly to the locker, opened the latch, and retrieved a small package of salmon. She peeled it open and, keeping her body low and movements fluid, walked 10 cautious steps forward. The bear didn't budge. She placed the salmon on a flat rock, then backed away. The bear remained still for a moment longer, then rose and hobbled forward. Every step looked painful, but when it reached the rock, it didn't snatch the food or tear it apart like she expected. Instead, it lowered its nose, sniffed, and gently took the fish in its jaws. 1 bite, 2. Then it paused, lifting its head to look directly at her again. And then, Eliza could have sworn, it nodded. Her breath caught. It wasn't anthropomorphism. It was a real, slow dip of the head, as though acknowledging her kindness. Then, just as quietly as it had come, the bear turned and limped back into the woods. Eliza stood frozen for minutes, staring at the fading trail of prints in the snow. That wasn't normal. Nothing about that was normal. She felt it deep in her gut. This had meant something. But what? She walked back inside her cabin, locked the door, and took a moment to steady herself. She logged the incident in her field journal in crisp, factual detail. But after the entry, she found herself writing something she hadn't expected. There was something in its eyes. Not animal instinct, not survival. It looked at me like it remembered me, or like it wanted me to remember it. That night, the fire crackled low as she sat wrapped in a quilt, staring out the window into the woods. The moon cast pale light across the snow, but the tree line held only shadow. She told herself it was over. A one-time event. A strange fluke. But as she slipped into sleep, a prickle crawled up her spine. Something about that bear unsettled her. Not with fear, but with a deep, nagging sense that this encounter was not the end. It was the beginning. The next morning, Eliza stirred before sunrise, woken not by the usual whistle of wind or the distant croak of ravens, but by an unfamiliar silence. A watchful silence. A stillness that wrapped around the cabin like held breath. Heart tapping uneasily in her chest, she crept to the frosted window and wiped away a fogged patch with her sleeve. At first, all she saw were the trees, heavy with snow, the faint purple of dawn bleeding into the sky. But then, movement. Her breath caught. There he was, the bear. The same massive, limping figure from the day before, seated just 20 feet from her porch in the exact same spot. His breath puffing clouds into the cold air. His posture was patient, unmoving, not pacing, not sniffing, waiting. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him, barely visible beneath a cluster of brush weighed down by snow, were two tiny forms. Shaking, fur stuck to their spines, eyes wide with exhaustion. Bear cubs. No more than a few weeks old, they looked more like trembling puppies than wild predators. Eliza's stomach dropped. She blinked, unsure if the cold or her nerves were making her hallucinate. But no. When the bear turned his head slightly, one of the cubs weakly whimpered. That small, heartbreaking sound cut through the glass and the wind like a blade. Eliza backed away from the window, her chest tightening. This wasn't just another wild visit. It was something else entirely. She slipped on her parka and boots with shaking hands, grabbed the remaining smoked salmon, and stepped onto the porch slowly, every movement deliberate. The big bear looked up but didn't move. The cubs remained under the brush, shivering, huddled together for warmth. Then something astonishing happened. The adult bear gave a low, soft grunt, barely audible. One of the cubs, wobbling on unsteady legs, emerged from the thicket and began stumbling toward the cabin. Eliza could see its tiny paws breaking through the thin ice crust, its legs trembling with every step. Her instincts screamed. No protocol covered this. She wasn't just looking at wildlife, she was looking at desperation and trust. The realization struck her like a lightning bolt. The bear hadn't come back for food. He had come for help. He trusted her, enough to bring his babies, his everything, into her human space, into her care. Eliza's throat tightened. She laid the salmon on the porch and gently stepped back. The cub, too weak to climb the steps, collapsed just a foot from the bottom. It didn't cry out. It didn't even look afraid. Just spent, defeated. Eliza couldn't just stand there. Her mind raced. She had to help, but not recklessly. She glanced toward her tool shed, barely 15 feet away. It wasn't heated, but it had thick tarps, fire blankets, and a covered area that could offer basic shelter. Her gut twisted with urgency. Breaking every rule in the book, she sprinted to the shed, yanked the door open, and began yanking out whatever she could use. 2 military-grade thermal blankets, a wool tarp, and a backup propane heater she hadn't touched in years. By the time she returned to the porch, the second cub had emerged and curled up next to the first, their fragile bodies pressed together, rising and falling with shallow breaths. Eliza spread the tarp and blankets inside the shed's alcove, creating a nest of warmth, then placed a few pieces of thawed meat nearby. She approached the cubs slowly, holding her breath, expecting the mother bear to react at any moment. But she didn't. The adult bear simply stood, watching Eliza with eyes that burned with something ancient and aching. Not rage, not fear, hope. "I'm not going to hurt them," Eliza whispered as she crouched beside the cubs. "I promise." She lifted the first cub in her arms. So light, far too light. Its fur was cold. Its tiny heartbeat fluttered against her coat like a bird's wing. Then the second. Neither protested. They were too far gone for fear. She placed them gently into the sheltered space, wrapped them together in the blankets, and added hand warmers tucked in fabric. When she turned back toward the bear, the snow crunched beneath her boot. The bear was still watching, but his head lowered slightly, just for a moment. A gesture. A message. Eliza didn't realize she was crying until her tears burned cold on her cheeks. "You brought them to me," she choked out, voice cracking. "Why me?" There was no answer, only the sound of the wind and the low hum of the propane heater firing up. She went inside to grab a bottle of electrolyte solution and her emergency medical kit, then paused, uncertain. She wasn't enough. This needed more than basic triage. They needed a vet, a real one. Now. Eliza's hand hovered over the satellite phone for a full minute before she picked it up. She didn't call headquarters. She called Ramirez. Dr. Leo Ramirez, her oldest friend from Wildlife Academy, now a practicing wildlife veterinarian 2 towns away. She hadn't spoken to him in almost a year. He picked up on the third ring. "Leo," she said without preamble, "I need you to come to the outpost, now, and you need to keep it off the books." "Eliza? What?" "2 cubs, near hypothermic. A wild bear brought them to my cabin." A pause, then, "You're serious?" "Dead serious. I'll bring what I can. Be there by twilight." And just like that, the clock was ticking. Eliza spent the next few hours monitoring the cubs, alternating meat broth and warm water, checking their paws, eyes, and breathing. The big bear, who she assumed was the mother despite the unusual stoicism, remained just beyond the shed, unmoving. A silent sentinel. When twilight settled like a bruise over the tree line, headlights emerged through the forest path. Dr. Ramirez climbed out of his truck, bundled and stunned. One look at the scene and his mouth fell open. "You weren't exaggerating," he whispered. In front of him, a wild bear standing guard near a heated shed, 2 cubs wrapped in ranger blankets, and Eliza, eyes red, exhaustion etched deep into her face, but fierce with determination. "I broke every rule," she said, trembling. He looked around. "And you saved 3 lives." Dr. Ramirez moved quickly, his breath fogging the cold air as he worked inside the makeshift shelter with steady, experienced hands. The cubs, now partially warmed and hydrated, lay nestled in blankets beside the propane heater, their tiny chests moving just a bit easier. But something wasn't right. One of them wouldn't put pressure on its hind leg. "Eliza, hold her steady," he murmured. Eliza cradled the cub gently, her gloved hands trembling. Ramirez examined the limb with delicate pressure, his brow furrowing deeper with every second. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a portable X-ray scanner. A few flashes, a pause. Then, "Damn it. What is it?" she asked, heart already bracing. Ramirez showed her the screen. Embedded near the femur was a jagged sliver of metal, unnaturally shaped, edged like a weapon. "A bullet fragment," he said flatly. "Someone shot this cub." Eliza's breath caught in her throat. Not a trap, not a fall, a gun. Everything clicked at once. The gaunt appearance, the limp, the bear's desperation, the silent urgency in those eyes. This wasn't just a plea for warmth. It was a cry for survival from a mother running from something far more dangerous than weather. "Poachers," she whispered. "They're hunting illegally in the preserve." Ramirez nodded grimly. "And the mother probably did everything she could to keep them safe. But without real help—" "She came to me," Eliza finished, swallowing the rising emotion in her chest. The mother bear had risked everything, crossing human scent lines, abandoning the wild code of caution, all because she knew she couldn't save her cub alone. And now Eliza knew why that trust had felt so specific, so personal. Something about those eyes. Eliza stood, her mind flooding with memories. A younger version of herself, 6 years earlier, walking a snowy trail after reports of snare traps. The sight of a massive bear caught in rusted steel, growling weakly, bleeding badly from a wounded leg. She had no backup, but something in the bear's eyes, then two, had kept her from retreating. She remembered tranquilizing the animal, cleaning the gash, pulling the steel jaws from its leg, staying with it for hours until it could walk. Just before releasing it back into the forest, she'd spotted an odd mark, a crescent-shaped scar just behind its left ear, likely from an old injury. Heart pounding, she stepped out into the icy twilight and looked toward the mother bear, still standing silently near the edge of the tree line. "Come on," she muttered, grabbing her flashlight. She approached carefully, slowly circling wide to get a clear view of the bear's head without threatening her. The bear didn't move, didn't flinch, just turned slightly, as if it knew what she needed to see. And there it was, a pale crescent of missing fur, scar tissue raised beneath it, the exact same mark. Eliza staggered backward, eyes wide. The breath fled her lungs. "It's you," she whispered. "It's really you. The scar, the eyes, the gentleness, the calculated trust. All of it. The bear she'd saved 6 years ago had remembered, had survived, had lived long enough to become a mother. And when danger struck her cubs, she hadn't fled deeper into the woods. She had come to Eliza. Not for herself. For them." Back in the shelter, Ramirez worked on extracting the bullet fragment, pausing only when Eliza re-entered. She said nothing, only knelt beside the second cub and touched its paw with trembling fingers. "Same bear?" Ramirez asked quietly. She nodded. "I saved her once. Years ago." "She never forgot," he said. "Animals don't. Not when it matters." Eliza stared into the darkness beyond the heater's glow. Her heart ached, not from guilt, but from the weight of connection. She'd spent years believing her work mattered in the abstract, rescuing, protecting, enforcing regulations. But now she saw the truth in flesh and fur. This wasn't just about rescue, it was about relationship. The next morning brought no peace. Ramirez stayed behind to monitor the cubs while Eliza packed a rucksack with field gear, motion-triggered cameras, a satellite communicator, and her worn leather notebook. She needed to find out who was hunting in her preserve, and stop them before they returned. "I'll keep everything off the books," Ramirez assured her, "but be careful." Eliza didn't respond. She was already halfway into the trees, boots crunching on fresh snow, adrenaline dulling the cold. She started near the perimeter of the trail where the bear had first emerged. Her eyes scanned for signs, a broken branch, fur caught on bark, blood in the snow. It didn't take long. Near a frozen creek, she found the first trace, a drag mark leading to a dark patch beneath a pine. The snow was stained crimson, the icy crystals frozen solid around it. Eliza knelt beside it, brushing away debris until she spotted it. Boot prints. Human. Heavy. Deep-treaded. She followed the trail, breath fogging before her face, every step fueled by a rising mix of rage and disbelief. Her sanctuary, the land she'd sworn to protect, was being used as a killing ground. Another 100 feet, and she spotted a broken branch dangling by a thread of nylon twine, a snare trap. She cut it down and photographed the area. She'd place cameras on the trees nearby. If they came back, she'd have proof. But more than that, she wanted to see them with her own eyes, catch them before they harmed another innocent creature. As she worked, her mind drifted. She'd always believed her duty was one-directional. Humans protect animals. Rangers guard the wild. But this bear, this mother, had turned that belief on its head. She had remembered Eliza, carried that memory, and, in her darkest hour, had returned to that fragile thread of trust. Eliza exhaled slowly, lowering the camera from the tree. She'd spent a lifetime saving animals. She never imagined one would come back to save its own. Through her. Back at the shelter, the cub with the bullet wound slept quietly, wrapped in thick blankets, its chest rising more steadily. Ramirez nodded when she entered. She'll make it. Just needs time and warmth. You found anything? Too much, Eliza said grimly. They're out there. Poachers. Close. Ramirez frowned. Then you're not just dealing with nature anymore. No, she said, setting down her gear. Now I'm dealing with something far worse. She looked back toward the window, where the mother bear still waited, still watching. The next move belonged to Eliza, and she was ready. Eliza had barely closed her field journal when she heard the crash. Not outside. Inside. She spun around and raced toward the main cabin. Her boots skidded across the icy steps. The front door, ajar, creaked in the wind. Her stomach twisted. "Please, no," she whispered. Bursting through the threshold, she froze. The adult bear was inside. The massive creature stood in the center of her kitchen, framed in dim lantern light, shoulders heaving with each labored breath. His fur, normally rich and dark, was now matted with blood along his right side. Deep red streaks painted the floor beneath him. He wasn't rampaging. He wasn't roaring. He stood still, majestic and broken, head lowered, one massive paw resting atop her open freezer, where sealed bags of meat lay scattered. Eliza instinctively reached for her tranquilizer, but stopped. His eyes met hers, and there it was again, that look, that impossible, haunting look that shattered the wall between man and beast. Not fear, not fury, just trust. He'd returned, wounded, dying, to her. Eliza dropped the tranq gun and raised both hands slowly. "It's okay," she said softly, voice trembling. "You're okay. You found me. I've got you." The bear exhaled, a low, pained groan. Blood dripped from his side, the flow steady now. She backed away just long enough to grab her radio. "Ramirez! Emergency! The adult bear. He's in my cabin. He's been shot." "I'll be there in 10, came the reply. "Don't move him." Eliza knelt nearby, watching the bear's legs tremble. He tried to lower himself gently to the floor, but collapsed with a heavy thud. She rushed to his side, clutching a towel and pressing it into the wound. He didn't resist, didn't growl, just watched her. She leaned in close, voice cracking. "You saved them. You went back into that forest, didn't you, to fight them off? You bled for them." He blinked slowly, eyelids heavy. "Let me save you now." When Ramirez arrived, the scene stunned him into silence. But there was no time for awe, just action. Working side by side, the two of them cleaned the wound, sanitized the puncture, and stitched layer by layer. At one point, as Ramirez focused on closing the muscle tear, Eliza gently laid a hand on the bear's massive brow. You knew where to go, who to trust. You remembered. The bear didn't flinch. His breathing slowed, steadying. The blood stopped seeping. Over the next 48 hours, the ranger station became a sanctuary unlike anything it had ever seen. The cubs, stronger now, began to toddle around the fenced enclosure outside the shed, playfully nipping at each other and pawing through snowdrifts. Their once glassy eyes now sparkled with life. Inside the main cabin, the father bear lay swaddled in thick blankets, rising slowly each morning, walking a little farther each afternoon. Each time Eliza entered, he turned his head toward her, never startled, never hostile, just aware, just present. She fed him in silence, cut fresh meat with a reverence she couldn't explain. Each moment with him chipped away at her old boundaries, her learned distance. Somewhere deep in her soul, she had crossed from ranger to something else entirely. Chosen. But Eliza knew this couldn't last. Even hidden, even safe for now, the bear family didn't belong among men, and the poachers, though silent these past days, would likely return, smarter, angrier, and deadlier. So she made a decision. Late one night, she called Ramirez again, not for a medical update, but for something bigger. "We relocate them," she said, "deep into the reserve, past the fire line, into the old growth." "You mean where the tracking stops?" he asked. She nodded. Exactly, where humans won't follow. It wasn't easy. Coordinating with a quiet network of wildlife officials and conservation allies, Eliza mapped a path to a secluded zone, nearly 100 square miles of untouched wilderness, designated but never developed as protected space. Ramirez secured transport cages. Eliza arranged off-grid equipment. They would leave before sunrise. The final morning came too quickly. A pink hush filled the sky as frost coated the pine needles. Eliza stood at the edge of the tree line, watching the cubs tumble through snow one last time. Ramirez closed the back of the transport truck, then turned to her. "We're ready." She nodded, throat tight. The father bear emerged slowly, moving stiffly but no longer limping. His coat had begun to grow back around the stitched wound. His eyes were clearer now, bright and alert. He walked right up to her. Eliza stood still. The bear paused just inches away. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, with unimaginable gentleness, the massive creature lowered his head and touched his nose to the back of her hand. A soft exhale, a nuzzle, then a single swipe of his tongue across her wrist. Eliza's breath hitched, her eyes blurred. "I'll never forget you," she whispered. Behind him, the cubs mimicked their father, approaching, pressing against her leg, one even clumsily pawing at her coat before retreating shyly. No growls, no snarls, just goodbye. Eliza opened the transport gates, tears running freely now. The family moved inside without resistance, without fear. The gates closed. Ramirez climbed into the driver's seat. And then they were gone. Eliza stood in the silence long after the truck disappeared into the trees. The wind whispered through the branches. Somewhere distant, an owl called. She turned to go inside, her heart heavier than it had ever been, and yet somehow also lighter. As she stepped onto the porch, she paused. Something lay at the foot of the door. A small, rusted object, rounded, metallic, dulled by age and weather. She bent down, breath catching, her ranger whistle. The very one she had lost 6 years ago in the snow, during the first rescue. She'd searched for it for hours back then. It had simply vanished. Until now. He'd kept it. For 6 years. And now, he'd brought it back. Eliza sank to her knees, clutching the whistle, laughter and sobs mixing in her throat. "He remembered," she whispered. "All this time. He remembered everything." She looked out over the forest, wind brushing her face like an old friend's hand. The wild had always felt separate. Today, it felt like home. And somewhere out there, among the pines and the rivers and the deep uncharted snow, a bear and his cubs walked free. Because love, once given freely, always finds its way back. Even across species. Even across years. Even in silence.